You're listening to The Higher Ed Marketer, the podcast for marketing professionals in higher education. Join us every week as we talk to the industry's greatest minds in student recruitment, donor relations, marketing trends, new technologies, and much more. If you're looking for conversations centered around where marketing in higher ed is going, this podcast is for you. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast. I'm Troy Singer, here with my co-host and good friend Bart Kaler. Today, we are talking about endurance, storytelling, and what it's really like to step into senior leadership in higher ed marketing with our guest, Dr. Jeff Salyer, Vice President for Enrollment and Marketing at Lee University, who brings a fresh insight from his first 6 months in the role and unique perspective shaped by his background in filmmaking. Bart, such a wonderful, thoughtful, practical conversation we had with Dr. Salyer.
Yeah, it's great. Jeff was great. I think one of the things I really like about Jeff is just his openness to be vulnerable and talk about, hey, this is what I've been dealing with in the first 6 months. This is how I did it. This is where I wish I would have done a little differently. And it's a refreshing, honest conversation that I really appreciate. He's just down to earth and just an enjoyable person to talk to. And I think you'll walk away with a lot of really good insights. I mean, he kind of talks about what he did when he first started, those benefits of doing that. Talks a lot about his filmmaking and the dissertation that he did on Pixar, which was fascinating. And then we get into a little bit about Zemi, and I just want to kind of say that today's episode is sponsored by Zemi. They're the student community platform that's been shaping enrollment for over a decade now, which is hard to believe that after 10 years of creating authentic student engagement and analyzing student actions, Zemi knows exactly what signals lead to enrollment. And they're bringing that data to colleges to help prioritize the right students and drive real results. So students open Zemi an average of 13 times a day, which is incredible, making it the place where Gen Z finds friends, explores colleges, and builds a sense of belonging before they even ever step on a campus. And it works. Students are on Zemi 2 times more likely to apply, 3.5 times more likely to commit, and 50% less likely to melt. Ready to make a recruitment smarter and more effective? Join the Zemi movement at Zemi.com. I love Zemi. You guys have heard me talk about it before. Grateful for their partnership and their sponsorship today and with the AI Summit, and we're working through some other things. But I don't talk about things that I don't believe in. That's why Ring Digital is here. I believe in Ring Digital. They do awesome work. And so I want to make sure that everybody knows about these wonderful supporters of the Higher Ed Marketer podcast. And if you're not familiar with Zemi, if you're not familiar with Ring, you need to become familiar. So just leave it with that, and I'm looking forward to our conversation with Jeff.
Thank you, Bart. Thank you, Zemi. And here is our conversation with Dr. Jeff Salyer. Jeff, we like to get things kicked off with something fun. So if you would, share something interesting that you've recently learned and you feel our audience would find interesting about you or what you learned.
If you're going to be dumb, you got to be tough. That's the life lesson that I have. And this is a phrase that my father says all the time. I don't think he coined the phrase. He probably heard it somewhere on the construction job. But that's kind of my life's motto, because I do a lot of dumb things. And as it recently applied to running across the Grand Canyon and then trying to come back. Well, the dumb part is running across the Grand Canyon. And the other dumb part is doing it and getting dehydrated and feeling like you're going to die. So there's a picture of me laying on the side of the canyon, cuddled up next to a rock. I had just thrown up everywhere, and I was in the shade. It was 110 degrees, and I thought I was dying. So that I got out. Obviously, I'm here. I did not make it all the way back across. So our goal was rim to rim to rim, and I made rim to rim. So, which is fine because I survived, and I learned a lesson from that, being dumb by getting dehydrated when I shouldn't. So I do this all the time because I'm an ultra runner, and so. But then that applies to my work life too. So if you're going to be dumb, you got to be tough.
That's awesome.
I love that. And as a wise man said to me, that is a writer downer. And that's something that I'm going to remember, because I think that I can learn a lot from that, Jeff, as we're going to learn a lot from you. One of the reasons why we wanted to connect with you now is that you recently, in the last 6 months, became leadership within the marketing team at Lee. So we'd like to know, you've been in this VP role at Lee University for about 6 months. And looking back, what's the biggest surprise, good or challenging, about stepping into senior leadership in higher ed?
Sure. I think this is something that can be applied across lots of different areas, not just higher ed. But in senior leadership, I found that it's more of a people job, you deal with your personnel and people on the outside, and you're always dealing with people. I thought I was going to come in and just tell really good stories and recruit students. And the truth is I'm dealing with a lot of employees, students and student workers and vendors and outside people, alumni, all the stakeholders. I think when you move into an executive leadership position, that ramps up the expectations from stakeholders. And so I've learned in this last 6 months that I really need to, talk and listen to the people that matter. And then I'm just dealing with these kind of situations as they come up, and things get smoother. It wasn't always smooth at the beginning, but things are getting smoother as I'm learning new things.
It's interesting that it is a kind of a relationship business, and in so many different ways. And we'll talk more about different ways that we're getting relationships with students too. But I just think, you mentioned you're an ultra marathoner. And so the idea of being an ultra runner and doing all of that, and it's kind of like, I think a lot of people think enrollment's like a sprint, but it's a whole lot more like an endurance race. So how's that kind of helped you, even having that background as a runner, helped you kind of approach those early months as a VP?
So I love ultra running. I have only been ultra running for about 4 years now. Before I ran full marathons, before that half marathon, I used to think everything was a marathon. But in a marathon, you're trying to run as fast as you can and try to beat your time. You're trying to break 4 hours, or you're trying to qualify for Boston or whatever it is. When you get into ultra marathons, I call it a run with a lot of snacks and some walking. And that's why this work kind of feels like that way, because sometimes you're running pretty hard and you're running pretty fast, especially if you're going downhill. But there's a lot of times you're climbing and it's a power hike, and you're just hiking, and just one step after the next, after the next, after the next. And eventually you're going to hit to the top. You're going to go back downhill, and you're going to start running again. And in between there, you have snacks. That's the way I kind of look at our recruitment cycles. That's kind of the way I look at the way we market when it comes to students. Is there are going to be times when you're as busy as you can be, whether it's with events or whether you're launching a campaign or you're trying to get people to kit their FAFSA, and whatever you're doing, you're sprinting those things. But then there are times that you got to slow down a little bit and walk with people and have one-on-one conversations, and it's not so frenetic, and I think that's why the ultra marathon thing works. And it's part of what I've learned is, like, how do you use the pace between sprint, hike, stop to eat, and then complete the race. And so I see this kind of cycle as more like a 50K than even a marathon.
That's actually really, really cool. And I'm just going to, since we've got on this little analogy, I'm going to keep it going. And so if I think about the idea, like you started off with your whole story about the Grand Canyon, which is pretty amazing. Now, whenever you do a 50K or the Grand Canyon or whatever you're doing, and I've read a couple books about some guys that do some ultra marathons, and it's fascinating to me. But I think about, you've got to start, because I've got some friends that are like, hey, I'm doing a 10K, or hey, I'm doing a marathon, and they start planning and they start working things out. A lot of people are using ChatGPT to kind of help them with their plan and things. But for you, when you do that, you have to start someplace, and you have to prioritize what you're going to start with. How did you do that coming into the VP role? I mean, how did you look at it and say, okay, man, I got this new hat. Now I got to start prioritizing, what to do. So how would you, what advice would you give people to kind of somebody just getting started to help prioritizing when leading a new team?
Sure. I mean, I'm maybe a little unique to some people when they're bringing in a new team, because my predecessor was really great at bringing me in on conversations and communicating with me, not just in my vertical, in my silo, but across our sector, what's going on between marketing, what's going on in financial aid, what's going on in undergrad admissions, what's going on in graduate admissions. And I was able to kind of hear those conversations ahead of time. So that prepped me for the first few months of what I was going to do next. And this is what I did. I just decided I was going to listen to people. And I went on my little mini listening tour with my stakeholders.
Yeah.
It started with, my team that I was leading as the director, and I listened to them and what their expectations were of me as I was moving up into a different role. And then I brought in everybody, all the people who were direct reports, all the people who were their reports, even student workers, and we just had meetings and listening sessions. And then I got outside of my own team and went to university-wide. Of course, I serve on the way we're structured. I serve on the president's cabinet, and so all the other cabinet members were very welcoming, and we would have our own conversations too.
Okay, that's good.
And then I try to discover where the problems were, and I wanted to go listen and hear what the problems actually were.
Right.
And I wanted to hear from the people. So, and I'm not going to name names, but whether it was the faculty who are very particular about the way they think the story should be told for a university or institution and the way we should recruit. And I just wanted to listen to them, hear their ideas on everything from dual enrollment to graduate enrollment to scholarships and those things. And then I listened to our student life people, and how marketing could come alongside them internally, how we could use the things that they do to market externally. And I just listened for a long time. I have a notebook, I have a digital notebook, and I just took notes.
Yeah.
And whenever I could, I brought my assistant with me. I said, just take copious notes. Let's learn what we should be doing or what people expect us to be doing. And then I kind of went to town on just vision, right? What would I do in here to make this better? And I didn't think it was bad. Like, I think I had a really great leader before me, but there were things that I do a little differently. So you have to slowly introduce those to people. But I think if you listen to people first, they're more readily, they're apt to listen to you back, and you guys can have a great conversation that way. So I'm a big communication person, so I want to communicate as much as I can.
Well, I know that part of your listening, because you talked a lot about the internal listening and listening to where the issues were, where some of the rub might be, some of the friction. But one thing I really appreciate about you, and I learned this from our friends at Zemi, that you also listen to people outside, and you have a chance to be able to sit down with other people and listen to partners and say, hey, here's something I've got going on. And I know that was one of the very first decisions that you made, was to bring on a partner like Zemi. Tell us about that.
So I know a lot of people in my position, stiff arm vendors is what I call it. So
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Keep it arm's length, or tease them and then, take the ball away.
Right.
I don't like doing that. I'm a pretty candid person. I have a lot of candor in the way I operate in my office, and then with vendors as well. So if I'm not ready, then I tell you I'm not ready. But I'm also willing to listen. And Zemi had a really great argument, and it didn't hurt that when I first got this job, I didn't mention this, part of my listening tours, I called other predecessors that were in the same role at Lee before even the guy that left before. So there's two guys, and both are really successful enrollment folks. Phil Cook, who's the president of NACAP, and then Gary Ray, who is the VP of enrollment at Texas State. And I said, okay, I want some advice. And both of them talked about Zemi. And it just so happened that the sales folks at Zemi had reached out to me and said, hey, can we have a meeting? I was like, okay, let's have a meeting. If all of these things are triangulating together. And I was really impressed with just what they were saying, because there is a missing component out there in the student recruitment and marketing side, which is this user-generated content, but not just user-generated content, user-generated communication that's outside something that we can construct for them.
Right.
So an area where students can find out from other students and have conversations with each other, and that breaks down the walls between what's going on and what somebody might perceive is going on, and Zemi provides a good platform for that. So I was really impressed with that, the way they presented it, and then we jumped on as partners. I said, okay, one of the biggest issues we have is student engagement before they matriculate. And one of my biggest goals was to increase our matriculation rate. So our app rates were up, and we felt pretty good about that. But I know that we can grow if we can matriculate more. And Zemi gave us a platform where we could directly communicate, because these students do not read emails.
No.
Okay, some of them do, but they do not read emails, and they'll take text messages, but that's usually not answering the questions they really want to know. They want to know, what am I going to do on campus that's fun?
Yeah.
How am I going to get along with people in the dorm? Is the food actually good, or is the marketing people just overhyping it?
Right.
And what's bad, right? So it's the authentic place to have conversations, and Zemi just gives us a good platform for that.
Yeah. It's a great tool. Troy?
Jeff, you have a rich background in filmmaking, including directing a feature documentary on Lee's history, and would like to know, how does storytelling, that lens, shape the way that you go into your marketing role?
Okay, so I love stories. Stories are the thing. I think we have another question coming up later about story, but I cut my teeth here at Lee as an undergrad making videos, video production. That was my thing. I could shoot and edit videos. I learned from masters about how to ask the right questions to get to the core of the story that's going on. And so video has always been my platform since the beginning of my early days in my career. And that's where I worked at Lee as my career too, is doing video production. So with that in mind, we always had this kind of idea that we got to tell our story through the people who are here, through the people who were impacted by the place. So whether that's current faculty, current students, alumni, it's just always using video and other medium now to tell a story about what could be and what has been. I'm also a big legend and lore person, so this is where this documentary comes in. It was our centennial in 2018 for Lee. So Lee was founded in 1918, and we came up and decided we wanted to tell that story in multiple ways, and we did. We did everything from like museum pieces and tours and all sorts of things, a magazine and a book. But I wanted to do a documentary film because there's a lot of legend and lore that people don't know unless it's passed down from person to person to person. And in 100 years, you can lose some of that. And this gave us a way to anchor kind of the Lee story. And so we just made this documentary, and it's a feature-length documentary, and it was rushed, and we didn't have a lot of money, but it's pretty good. And we told some of these legends of Lee, and they have become kind of the way we have framed a lot of who we are. You know, we have an underdog story, and we overcome all these challenges, which is what stories are all about anyway, right? It's about the conflict and overcoming that to become better, or to move yourself forward. And that's the life, that's the journey of a student. When we're recording this, we're in graduation season. In fact, my daughter's getting ready to graduate high school. And so you reflect on all this thing, and these kids all have this story arc. They start in elementary school, and then they end in high school, and then there's this great conflict. Where am I going to go next? What am I going to do with my life? And it's the next step in their journey. And stories just help them live out that. And you can, as a marketer, we're trying to say, this is the place where you can live the next chapter of your story, preparing you for the next chapter, which is even greater. So that's, for me, that's the impact of story on the lives of in our recruitment efforts, but then also in the lives of the brand. And so that we tell our story as legend because we want people to understand the brand itself and grow the brand. We're a relatively small brand in the higher ed world, but if we can tell our story, then more people will know about us.
That's great. I love reading books about, how to do story, like Story Brand by Don Miller. And I read the Creativity Inc., the story of Pixar. Yeah. And so I'm like, I'm really reading this. But then I learned that you did your dissertation on Pixar and on the stories around what they're doing. And I know I have not read the dissertation, but I know of it. And I know that there's this thing you call the restoration value model. Explain that a little bit. Tell us what you discovered in your dissertation that you can apply to storytelling, maybe that we could apply as we learn from you.
Sure. So I have a PhD in communication from Regent University in Virginia Beach, and they've got a really great communication grad school. Mm-hmm. And my focus of my studies were on rhetoric. And, typically rhetoric is speeches or these well-written letters, and they're political a lot of times. Well, I'm a video guy, I'm a film guy. So I was like, I'm going to take it to film, which is a legitimate study of it. And I wanted to look at what was affecting my life at the time. And I go back to my daughter, who was very young. I graduated 10 years ago this week, actually.
Wow.
And so we were watching a lot of Finding Nemo.
Yep. I've been there, Jeff. I've been there.
A lot of Finding Nemo. To the point where I had to skip the opening scenes because it was always, why are all the fish dead? All the eggs, where are they at? So but there was something about that, and Pixar just piqued my interest because they were such, they were just a brand that everybody knew. They never made a bad film. They always won at the box office. They always won in the Oscars. And I was like, why? What is going on here? And what really it boils down to is they created this kind of rhetorical, as a studio, they use story. Andrew Stanton talks about this a lot, who actually directed Finding Nemo, and about these elements of story that we can read about in Robert McKee or Chris Vogler, and they perfected it, but they did it in a way where what I looked at is the rhetorical side of things. As a studio, they were demonstrating this conservative, and I say conservative in the not political terms, but in this idea, this philosophy of Thomas Jefferson of creating life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as the American dream, right? It was this classic American dream. Well, Pixar, I say, propagates that through all of their films, at least their early films, by taking the hero, making them an outlier in their own society, and then making them better. So then when they re-enter that society, they make their society better, their culture better. And it is all wrapped around, the family. It's all wrapped around and community building and serving other people. If you think about the movies like The Incredibles or Up or which I cry every time I watch Up still too. I was like, why did I make a chapter on Up? Because I'm just crying, I'm blubbering every time I watch the film. And so Pixar, they do this in a rhetorical way that then we as the viewer, the audience, are just drawn into, and we can see ourselves in those characters. And so again, it's story, it's just a little bit, that's why they're so well loved, is because they took it just another level with that hero, making them a complete outlier and then bringing them to restore their lives, but also all the lives around them.
I love that because, you talk about the rhetorical, you talk about the restoration. I think sometimes in communications, we miss the fact that students they'd have questions that we have the answers for. And too often we treat our communications as transactional as opposed to invitational to say, hey, these are things that we've learned. This student has a story that might be yours. And I think that that's a missed opportunity many times when we're just trying to, we trudge it out and we're just like, okay, I got to get that view book out. I got to get that, whatever out. And so we miss the opportunity to really lean into what makes us all common and what all that works. And so that's really cool. And as I think about that, obviously you would know this. Video is one of the things that we lead with all the time when we talk to clients. It's like, hey, you don't have enough video on your website. You don't have enough video on your Instagram Reels or TikTok or whatever. So it's bigger than ever in higher ed. So what do you think are some creative ways you've seen colleges using, or maybe opportunities they're missing to use video to connect with students?
Okay, I'll give you 2 or 3 examples. One, I want to go back a little bit because we have a tradition of storytelling at Lee that may be a little different from other universities. At the end of every semester, when our commencement weekend, we have a commissioning service. And in that commissioning service, we invite 5 students to tell their Lee story. And it is very unique, and they're chosen from their different backgrounds and majors and how they're going forward in life. And then we also have a senior stories chapel, because we have chapel every couple of days at Lee. And so we really embrace storytelling as a thing, as it is almost like a sacrament at Lee. Like, this is something we do. We just tell stories.
Right.
So that's why, and so we use those stories then to demonstrate to students, this could be you. You might see yourself here because this is the same kind of person that you're coming from. You're first gen, or you came from way far away from Lee, and you came from Maine, and Lee's 2,000 miles away. So we use stories that way too. We also really engage in social media and try to let the students kind of run the content a little bit and tell the stories too. And sometimes it's scary to let students take control of your socials. Like we just posted a video today and I watched it and I was like, I don't know if this is any good. And every time I do that, it blows up.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, it's good. I'm a video editor, but they're editing in different styles that I can't even try to accomplish.
CapCut's a whole lot different than Premiere.
Yeah, yes, it is. And so, that's an opportunity that we're trying to take advantage of, is let the students have the ideas. We have a very heavy student worker social media team. So we have me and a marketing coordinator, and then we have about a team of 10 social media students from all the majors, just everywhere you can think of, including marketing and including in communication, but theology majors and business majors and music and worship majors. And they come in with their own perspectives and we let them tell stories. And I think that's something we try to do on our tours as well, is let student tour guides tell their story rather than all the facts about the building. Over here you'll see, the School of Theology and Ministry, and there's a lot, you have to take classes in here. That's great. No, it's like, hey, I did not have a clue that I didn't know what I knew, didn't know about the Bible, right? And so they can tell their own stories. And I think that's the opportunities that universities have, is to let your students help tell the story and shape the story.
I agree with you. I think that's one of the key authentications of key authenticators is letting students tell their story. Mm-hmm. And I think the more that we get into an artificial intelligence world, the more Generation Z, and quite frankly, all of us, are going to be kind of, passionately longing to see authenticity, because it's going to be kind of artificial around us. And so I think schools like Lee are going to succeed because you got that in spades, and being able to kind of tell those stories, tell that life transformation, being able to show that and have people understand that's awesome.
Yeah, thanks. I do think this story is where it is. And so when I put my marketing hat on, I'm always telling, what's the story? When I put my enrollment hat on, I'm asking my admissions people to tell the story. Like, we're just renovating a welcome center. So it hasn't even opened yet. And all around the walls of this welcome center are the Lee stories, segmented in things like student life and academics and our history and our region. I don't think people tell the story of their region enough. Like, Cleveland's a small town, but it's nestled in just the most beautiful foothills of the Smoky Mountains, right in the Appalachians, trails everywhere, rivers everywhere. Chattanooga's 20 minutes away, and schools are not benefiting from, like, okay, Cleveland's a little small, but we have all these really cool things going on. And so you have to tell your town story, you have to tell your faculty story, you have to tell your student stories, and there's just so much opportunity. But I go back to video. Video's expensive unless you can do it in-house. And so, but you have to prioritize budgets towards storytelling. That's my advice as a baby VP who has been asking for money for a long time before I became a VP. So, let's prioritize our storytelling assets, whether that's in design or video or web, and let's make sure that we're really leaning into that.
That's awesome.
Jeff, we know that successfully reaching students today is requiring you to be present of where they already are. So we're going to ask you to kind of go back and elaborate on something that you did earlier in the conversation. We understand that Lee has had success using platforms like Zemi to build early engagement with prospective students. So if you would, could you share how that's helped students start connecting even before they arrive on campus?
Sure. And we're a little late in the game to signing our Zemi contract this year. We were probably mid-cycle, and by the time we spun everything up, we're late. So we're really only right now talking to applicants, and that's okay because they feel very intimately connected to one another. Mm-hmm. And what we saw is this early surge of connectivity as everybody's kind of getting on the platform and learning more about the platform. Some students have been on there for a while with different schools. Some just jumped on for the first time with us. And then what we saw was this natural ability for the students to connect around things that we do on campus. So for example, our largest recruitment day, we call it Lee Day. It's actually 2 days. It's just not good branding to call it Lee Days. But we call it Lee Day, and it's 2 days. And what we saw were students saying, who's going to Lee Day? Who's registered for Lee Day? Who's doing this? And then what we called them our Zemi kids, because we would see these clusters of people who would make meetups just natural without us. We did not create meetups. But they were like, hey, let's go meet at the gazebo so then we can all go to the worship rally together. And then they all sat together and they became connected. And so they created their own virtual community that moved into the real life community, and they're more likely to enroll. Because they've already made these connections. And even if they didn't come on campus together, they are having these conversations around it's fun to watch the conversations. And Zemi's really great about telling you where you can and can't, what lane you should stay in as an administrator or as an admission staff or whatever, and let the students just have their conversations. They got a really great theological discussion the other day that, it would be hard for somebody like me or an adult, we'll call it an adult, to not jump in and be like, hey, but they figured it out themselves and they talked. And then that conversation moves on to sports. And then that conversation moves on to theater. And then that conversation moves on to music. And it's the way they communicate with one another. So, and a lot of times it feels like a big group chat. And when it's a group chat, it doesn't feel like a marketing tool.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the interesting things that I really like. I mean, we partner with Zemi and share some partnerships together with them. And one of the things I know that they often talk about is the idea that it doesn't feel like a marketing tool. And so a lot more than marketing is involved. I mean, a lot of times people are like, oh, that's a marketing thing, go talk to my marketer. But really it requires, not only the marketing team, it requires the enrollment team and admissions. It requires other collaboration with other folks around campus. Talk about how that works, because I know a lot of times when even people hearing that now might be like, oh wow, that seems like a lot of work to try to coordinate all the different people to work on this. But I think that the juice is worth the squeeze on doing that, and I'm sure there are ways that you've kind of learned to collaborate your groups together.
Yeah, I mean, the missions counselors all know that this is an important tool, and they check it regularly, and they know kind of their lane and what they're doing. And then the administration side of things, we know just kind of to manage the big picture, and then we bring in these conversations outside. And the secret sauce are the students, and it's our current students.
Yeah.
So our current student ambassadors who we hire, a lot of them are on our social team already. They're going in and they're asking questions and they're answering questions and they're creating conversations that are natural, and it might be out of their major, but it might be out of student life.
Yeah.
And those that where these students don't know they're being marketed to. And honestly, it feels unfair because I'm not trying to market to them. I'm not telling our students, okay, go ahead. We're not having these big strategy sessions. Maybe we should. Zemi hasn't told me.
I think the authenticity of what you're doing is working. So.
I think so too. And, I'm always second guessing myself to our account manager. I'm like, Mackenzie, are we doing the right thing? and they're great. They're so encouraging and say, no, you're doing great. This is the way it's supposed to work.
Right.
And so I want it to feel natural for the students to use and not get frustrated if they're not talking to each other, because it's like the ultra marathon we talked about. There are these moments where they're like right now, a lot of them are taking finals or they're getting ready to graduate, and they don't have time for Zemi.
Yeah.
Cool. But as soon as they graduate, they're going to want to connect with people in the summer. So understanding, and then trying to get the whole campus to know what it is. A lot of them get a little confused because you're like, oh, it's like social media, but just for students. And I've had them ask, well, can we get on there so we can answer questions? And I'm like, no. Like we would sometimes, maybe, but no, because I don't want it to feel like a bunch of old people in there, and anybody over the age of 22 is old to them. So let's not put old people in there. And
that's what happened to Facebook. It used to be all about the kids, and then mom and dad and grandma got on. So
I jumped on when it was you had to have a .edu account. Yeah. I was a young staff member at Lee, and I was like, oh, I'll see what this is all about. And I was like, oh, it's a bunch of kids in here. And then the grandparents came in, which I'm appreciative. So
yeah. Well, one thing that I really like, and a lot of times I'll talk about Zemi, and there's the same thing that you get on campus. I don't know what that is. What is that? I'm always amazed when I pull it up, because I do have an account on Zemi. I don't talk. I don't do anything. I'm just kind of a background. But I pull up and I'm like, look, there are 287 people talking about your school, and they've identified, and they're like, wow, I didn't know that. And that's one of the beautiful things is that your school's out there. It's already got a community that people are talking about you and talking, but you're not there. And I love the fact that you guys are participating in that and a part of that now with your students. So this is awesome. Thanks for the time. I know, Troy, you've got a couple final questions for us.
Absolutely. And as Bart knows, Jeff, we end every episode by asking our guests if you could give one piece of advice to someone, and I'm going to pose it as stepping into the new VP or leadership of enrollment marketing, what would that be?
I got 2 pieces of advice. Is that okay?
That's even better.
Yes.
Okay. One, we kind of touched on this before. Be willing to listen, but listen with some humility, because I know a lot of things. I've been around the block, and I've been around Lee and this enrollment and marketing for a long time, but I don't know everything. And in fact, I probably know less than I know more. So I'm just not. So go listen to people, because people have opinions and they're valid. And be sure you listen to everybody from leadership to your students and everybody in between. Like I'll stop and have a conversation with one of our custodians, which are awesome, or our people in food service, which are great. And I'll ask them, what are you hearing? What are the kids saying? What are you observing? And they'll give me really rich qualitative data that I can take back to my team and say, hey, did you know this? And they won't. And it just makes us better. And as a leader, I think you have to, not just show humility, but be humble and have these conversations, some of which are difficult when they don't really like what you're doing,
right,
or don't understand it. And so having those conversations are tough, and that can be with anybody, including faculty, right?
Yeah.
The other piece of advice is do dumb things. Do dumb things. Be tough, because it makes you better. And that really, the better way to put it is like, take some risks. Like, don't be afraid to fail. And that's kind of my dumb things is taking risks. Whether that's in a storytelling environment, or whether that's, let's try to do a podcast, or let's try Zemi, which is a risk for us. There's a financial risk that goes with that, and you might fail, but you might not, and it might be great. And even if you do fail, it's that dumb and tough mentality. You're going to get tougher because of it, and you're going to learn something. So listen to people and take big risks, or be dumb.
Love that.
I love it too, and we've all heard about taking big risks in life, but the way you put it was very meaningful, and that's the way I'm going to think about it going forward. So thank you, Jeff. And for others that you have connected with, or should I have said you've struck a wonderful chord with, that have listened to this episode, that may want to connect with you, what would be the best way for them to reach out and connect with you be?
Sure. I'm pretty active on my LinkedIn, and I'm pretty active on the Instagram, although it's a lot of family and a lot of running, so it's not on the professional side of things. The LinkedIn's the best way to connect with me. And then if you're a runner, you can follow me on Strava. I actually met a VP at another university at a college fair not too long ago, and we got to talking about running, and he said, you expect somebody to say, well, can I follow you on LinkedIn? Or, he says, you have Strava? Like, yeah, I have Strava. So we connected on Strava.
I love it.
So if you're a runner, connect with me on Strava.
Awesome.
Thanks again. Love the content that you've shared with us and our listeners today. And Bart, do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share before we close our episode?
Yeah, I'm just really grateful for Jeff being a part of our episode today. I know he and I met a few months ago, and really have enjoyed getting to know on this, and just kind of his vulnerability and honesty of just kind of sharing kind of those first few months of being a new VP and enrollment, and some of the success he's seen and some of the challenges, and just being vulnerable about that. I really appreciate about that, and really enjoyed hearing more about the story storytelling and just how you've kind of studied Pixar and how you're implementing that and how you would encourage us to do that as well. I just think that's fascinating. And then I just love the stories about Zimi and how you guys are using that, and just want to take a moment to say thanks to Zimi for introducing us to Jeff and to making this episode possible. So really grateful for their partnership as well. But just really would challenge everybody to kind of re-listen to some of the things Jeff talked about. I mean, he had some really, really good practical advice that I think everybody could walk away with and grow and be a better enrollment leader by doing so. So thanks again, Jeff.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. It's fun.
Thank you both. And to our audience, thank you so much for listening to the Higher Ed Marketer podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe or consider leaving us a review and telling a colleague about it. And please don't forget to follow us on the Higher Ed Marketer podcast on our LinkedIn page. And we hope to see you next week. As always, the Higher Ed Marketer podcast is sponsored by Kaler Solutions. Sorry, Bart. Your go-to partner for higher ed mission fit marketing strategies, enrollment, and branding needs. And sponsored by Ring Digital, our company. Your ad targeting experts for higher ed, putting you in front of your specific prospects and inquiries with provable, measurable increases in lift and yield. Until next time, wishing everyone happiness in higher ed.